of June 2021. Present with me today is Port Talbot, in Port Talbot Civic Center are Councillor Sharon Freegard, Councillor Steve Hunt, Councillor Sonia Reynolds, Craig Griffiths, Jane Woodman Ralph, and Charlotte Davis. Masks do not need to be worn by us today as we are adhering to the social distancing guidelines as detailed in the risk assessment undertaken to allow us to come into the council chambers today. Just to make you all aware, today's meeting will be recorded. Can I also welcome any members of the public, press to today's meeting? Can I kindly ask you to observe the meeting only and not speak or participate? Can I please remind you all to switch your phone to silent for the duration of the meeting? In addition, can I refer you to the protocols of remote meetings which have been previously circulated? Namely, your microphone should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either by the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams? I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. Please only use the chat function to indicate if you wish to speak as an alternative to electronic hand function or to raise any technical issues. When asking a question, can you please indicate which page number you are referring to? The first item on the agenda is to do a roll call. I am Councillor Saifur Rahman, the chair, and I am present. I will now call on Charlotte, the Democratic Service Officers, to take the roll call, please.
Yes, Chair. So if I start, Councillor Saifur Rahman, I can see you're present. Councillor Sharon Freegard.
Present.
Councillor Wyndham Griffiths, I've had apologies from him. Councillor Nigel Hunt.
Present all.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I'm here, Charlotte.
Councillor Dennis Keogh, I've had apologies from him. Councillor Simon Noyle.
I am here, thank you, Charlotte.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
Present all, President Charlotte.
Councillor Sandra Miller.
Present Charlotte.
The Rudian Maisen. Councillor Maisen.
I think Councillor Meisen had to leave the earlier meeting, Charlotte.
No problem, thank you. Councillor Susan Patterson.
Present.
Councillor Lynette Purcell.
Present.
Councillor Sheila Penry.
Present Charlotte.
Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
Present.
Councillor Rachel Taylor.
Here, Charlotte.
Councillor Arwyn Woolcock.
Present all, present.
And Councillor Stephanie Lynch as an observer. No. Then if I move on to cabinet members, Councillor Edward Latham.
Present Charlotte.
Councillor Leanne Jones.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Carol Clement Williams.
Present Charlotte.
Councillor Mike Harvey.
Present Charlotte.
Councillor Doreen Jones.
Present Charlotte.
Councillor Alan Lockyer.
Present, Charlotte.
Peter Rees.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Peter Richards.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Annette Wingrave.
Charlotte.
Oh yes, apologies, thank you. And then moving on to officers, Karen Jones.
Present.
Howell Jenkins.
Present.
Andrew Thomas.
Present.
Andrew Jarrett.
Yeah, I'm present, Charlotte.
Nicola Pierce.
Apologies from Nicola.
Apologies, thank you. Craig Griffiths.
Present, Charlotte.
Sheena Rees.
Present Charlotte.
Hugh Jones.
Yeah, present, Charlotte.
Simon Brennan.
Present, Charlotte.
Aaron Furlow.
Present Charlotte.
Rian Heaton.
Present.
Mike Shaw.
Present, Charlotte.
Paul Walker.
Present Charlotte.
John.
Present.
Jane Woodman Ralph.
Present.
And I think that's everyone. Have I missed any officers out at all or any members?
And I think Councillor Lynch is here as well now, Charlotte.
Okay, thank you. There we are, Chair, that's everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. The next item on my agenda for Cabinet scrutiny paper is the Chair's announcement. We have chosen to scrutinize items 6, 7, as well as the urgent private item, the youth custody service, which is on the Cabinet agenda. We have chosen to not scrutinize any items on the Cabinet Finance Subcommittee. Item number 3 then, declaration of interest. Can members please indicate whether they have any declarations in interest to the item that we have chosen to scrutinize? I don't see any. Moving on, pre-decision scrutiny. Can I now take you to the Cabinet papers, please? Item number 6, which is the Welsh Language Standards Annual Report, 2020 to 2021. I believe Sheena Rees, Karen Furlow, and Rian Heaton are the reporting officers. This item is for noting. Before I take any questions, can I ask, would officers like to give a brief overview of the report, or would you like me to go straight to questions?
Thank you, Chair. No, the report is a factual position statement, so I've nothing to add, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sheena. I have Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted just simply to ask on page 38 of the report whether there was any possibility of giving a reflection on how does the proportion of staff compare to the general population, representing a mainly Welsh-speaking ward, as some others do here. It would be interesting to know that sort of comparison. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, Sheena.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is information that we should be able to provide. We're in the process of moving to a new HR payroll database, which will very much improve the way in which we're able to present data. So that's something that we should be able to do moving forward. So I think, Councillor Reynolds, you're asking for data that compares the percentage of staff to specific wards, are you?
It would be good to have the overall percentage, but I doubt you'd have a good comparison to specific wards, but it would be good to know the comparison in terms of the population of the county borough as a whole.
Okay, all right, noted. Thank you.
At the briefing which we held yesterday, there were Councillor Sonia Reynolds was the only member indicated wanted to ask question. Are there anybody else which is, oh, Alan, I can see Alan, Councillor Alan Llewellyn. Sorry, Alan, I didn't see you there then.
Yes, thanks very much. Apologies I wasn't able to attend the briefing yesterday. Very briefly, I think the report recognises the pressure that's been on our services, but also where gaps have occurred in the provision, and I welcome the commitments that are made in the report. I think that the key challenge is now to ensure that we make progress on the strategy and in achieving the standards, and I think that's reflected in the report. It's particularly important in promoting the use of the language within the authority and the communities, and we can expect to receive the 2021 census figures on the language in the next few months, not just for Neath, Talbot obviously, but across all of Wales, which will give an indication of progress towards the target of 1 million Welsh speakers set by the Welsh Government, but endorsed by ourselves as a local authority too. And I think the census outcome could well be challenging for the language, so I think we may need to review our strategy at that stage, but I appreciate the progress report that we have before us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Llewellyn. Well, this item is for noting, so members are instructed to note this item. Right, moving on to the next item, which we are to scrutinize, is the Revenue Outturn and Reserves Position Statement 2020 to 2021. Councillor Nigel Hunt already submitted a number of questions, which I have accepted that I will allow Councillor Hunt to ask. Can I ask Officer Howell Jenkins and Mr. Hugh Jones whether you wish to say a few words before I take questions?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight that this is a report which looks at the closure of the accounts for 2021. It's been an extraordinary year in relation to having to manage COVID, having to deliver some services in a very much different way over the past financial year. And the reports there shows that as a result of Welsh Government providing us with a substantial amount of additional monies during March of the year and into the end of the year, as we were closing the books in April, getting confirmation on some of those amounts, the figures have significantly improved as we have closed the books for the 2021 financial year. I'm still having discussions with Welsh Government on some of the claims that they haven't paid, and that could change some of these elements. And as you will be aware, the auditors have commenced work in relation to managing and reviewing our statement of accounts, and they are due to report back to the Governance and Audit Committee towards the end of July in terms of finalising the whole picture in terms of last financial year in relation to information included in this document, and we have to prepare in terms of statutory accounting requirements for those statements. So I'm happy to take questions from members, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Councillor Nigel Hunt, would you be kind enough to ask your questions, please? Councillor Hunt, you're muted. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I'm quite interested in the reserves because I think that the level of reserves that we have is inextricably linked with the council tax that we set, council tax rates we set. And I think it's a concern that we have the third highest council tax rates in Wales in this authority, and have had for a long time. So the question I would like to, one of the questions I'd like to ask Howell really was last week in full council, we read the auditor's report, and one of the key facts of the report stated that as of March 31st, 2021, the council had £51.9 million of usable reserves. This is the equivalent of 19.1% of the council's annual spend on services, and the 9th highest of the council's annual spend, ninth highest of the 22 local authorities in Wales. So I think there's a bit of an imbalance there between us having the 9th highest amount of reserves out of the 22 authorities, yet we have the 3rd highest council tax rate. So when I asked the auditor if there was any available data to see the variance on each authority's usable reserves as a percentage of its spend on services, and he replied to me that it was in the public domain, and that I could ask Howell if he could provide some of the data, or if he could signpost me to it. I think it would be beneficial to see the most prudent of the authorities and to the most risk-adverse authority in Wales, and where we lie in terms of percentages to these authorities. Furthermore, I would like to ask, at what point in the financial year is the need for reserves assessed? And when was the last time we assessed the need for reserves? Finally, having read Striking a Balance, the Audit Commission's report published in December 2012, it writes there that most chief finance officers in their research regarded an amount of between 3 and 5% of the council's net spending as a prudent level for risk-based reserves, and the minimum that auditors would consider prudent. What percentage is our risk-based reserves in terms of our net spend, and do we fall within that 3 to 5% as outlined in Striking a Balance? So there's my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt. Mr. Jenkins, you're ready to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've made some inquiries and reviewed the documents that the auditors referred to. This was a report that they prepared in October 2020, Financial Sustainability of Local Government as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reserve figures that is the only reserve figures that I can see being prepared across the whole of Wales. So when they mentioned that there was lots of information in the public domain, I haven't been able to find that information, Chair, very easily. But what I have found is the reports that they prepared, and I'm happy to share that with all councillors following the meeting. In terms of the figures, as Councillor Hunt mentioned, Neath Talbot has got the 9th best in reserve balances in Wales in terms of usable reserves, but this includes schools. It includes the money that we're setting aside to meet the commitments of the city deal, and it meets lots of others, and they include general reserves as well as specific reserves. And as Councillor Hunt said, there's about 19% of our net budget of £306 million, which was the budget for 1920 that they have calculated, held in our reserves. The lowest one had reserves of about £11 million, or 4.6%, going to the highest local authority with, in terms of percentage, £83 million and 33%. So there is a variation there, but I think it, in terms of those usable reserves values, it depends on how much monies your schools have also got. And if you if I looked at the last question that Councillor Hunt mentioned, which was what is the percentage that one has in general reserves, which is the important question, and how they are reflected in the accounts. This report in front of members today shows that our general reserves are closing at just over £20 million, at just over £20,036,000. At the moment, that is 6.34% of our budget for the current year of £316.2 million. But when you take into account the fact that we have committed £3.1 million from those reserves to balance the budget in 21-22, the projected balance now, based on these closing figures, is about £16.9 million, or 5.36%. So it's just a little bit higher than the figure, that, the 5% that is mentioned in the reports that Councillor Hunt referred to. He also asked the question about, well, how often do we review the reserves? When do we review the reserves, etc.? Well, every budget monitoring report that comes in front of Cabinet and Cabinet Scrutiny has got all the reserves balances on them, included in every report. And last year, we did so bi-monthly, every 2 months. We reported them to members. In previous years, it's every quarter. And then, of course, at the end of the year, we do the equivalent of this report to give you the final position. All of these issues are taken into account when we consider the budget for the coming year. And I am happy to have a further debate and a report for members to consider in the autumn, prior to commencing the budget discussions for 22-23, to bring a report forward to show this is that was the balance on the 1st of April 2021. What has been spent or committed to spend in the current year, and the future indicative positions on spend into subsequent years, because you can't or shouldn't be using all your reserves, because once you've spent them, they are very hard to replenish. We have been very fortunate this year in that, and I think that most Welsh local authorities as well will have seen their reserves position improve at the end of the year, because the Welsh Government has made some additional allocations available right at the end of the year to support our schools. They made £2.2 million available to spend on maintenance. They have made various monies available then for catch-up and learning for our schools. Similarly, they made commitments around social services with specific grants at the end of the year, and environment. They also provided additional support for digital services and for council tax collections. So all of those have come out in the last few weeks of the year, which has resulted in us in a better position than originally envisaged. In terms of our schools, as a council, we can't touch them. That is for the governing bodies of the individual schools to manage, and they will, of course, be under pressure now to spend some of these in the current year to help with learning and catch up for the children that have lost some of the education provision whilst in the various stages of lockdown over the past 12 months. And this allows them to have that opportunity to do so. Similarly, around the council, we will be producing further confirmation as we go through the next few weeks and months on what investments are going to be undertaken in relation to the commitments from the reserves. So, for example, you have got a DARE, decarbonisation strategy that was approved by Council not so long ago. We have set aside £2 million in terms of that strategy into the reserve, and there will be projects and investment opportunities that will come back for members' consideration once we've had the opportunity now of setting the money aside and looking at the best way of utilising those monies, and lots of that funding will be released over the next couple of years, Chair. So hopefully that gives an overview of where we're at and gives some of the answers that Councillor Hunt was looking for in terms of the this particular issue, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Councillor Hunt, you have right to come back, so I'm happy to ask you to come back in now. You're muted, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Saif, and thank you, Howard, for that overview. What I'd like to say really is that is it a pattern in the Welsh Government giving us extra monies at the end of a financial year? Is there a pattern with it? Do we have this regularly? And secondly, I suppose the $1 million question for me is that when you've got the general reserves and we've got we should be aiming at between 3 and 5% of our net spend. We're over that. We're on 5.36, so we're above that. I suppose the $1 million question is, if we'd have frozen our council tax this year, what percentage would we be on in terms of that 3 to 5%? And we would probably be closer to 5% than we are now. So I think we really have to consider as a council what level of reserves we need to give the Neath Talbot council taxpayers value for money. So yeah, that's the question I would like. The follow-up question is, if we'd have had a freeze on council tax, where do we think we would have been in terms of that percentage of general reserves against the net revenue expenditure? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hunt. It is a valid question. I will allow the question. However, I don't wish to go into any debate about council tax here today. Mr. Jenkins, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Every 1% on council tax is about £770,000. So we increased it by 2.5%. So that would have been the best part of £2 million that would be further committed. £2 million off this figure would have been below 5%. It would have been closer to 4% in terms of where we're going forward. But what we have to remind ourselves is that what are the risks around managing our budget going forward? You know that we built in a 1% pay award for teaching staff and non-teaching staff into the base budget for next year, and we allowed a little bit of a contingency as well. But you will have seen that in terms of national pay award negotiations, the Green Book pay awards have turned down a 1.5% pay award for the current year. And if I can refer to what has happened in Scotland, the unions have turned down a 2.75% pay award in terms of the budget pressures. So the potential for us to have to dip into reserves with a significant pay award over and above the £3.1 million that we have set aside for this current year is increasing by the minute, and I think there will be other challenges that we will also face as a result of us not being turned back to normal following the COVID pandemic very early in this financial year. So it'll be interesting how we manage funding releases from UK and Welsh Government over the next 10 months of this financial year and into subsequent years, because that will have an influence on how much reserves you should have and be able to use to manage activities over the next few years. I think there was another question that Councillor Hunt mentioned, but I can't remember what that was now. I don't know if you can remind me.
Councillor Hunt, the second part of your question.
Well, I think it was the first part of the question. I asked about the 3.5%, which 3 to 5, which your bank said, but you know, forgive me.
That's okay.
I think it's covered. I wanted to come back with something else, but I'm slightly thrown by what you've just said, really. But
can I allow others members first,
yeah,
and I'll come back to you,
course, yeah,
Councillor
absolutely.
Hunt, after. Okay.
Right.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn, please.
I was next. No.
Alan, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, do apologise. Yeah, I think Councillor Purcell was actually before me, but obviously, Chair, if you decide which order you call members. I think that the questions raised by Councillor Nigel Hunt are very sort of pertinent, and I welcome the suggestion by the Director of Finance to hold a specific discussion in the autumn, because obviously, you know, under the guidance that we have as members and striking a balance, I know it goes back a few years, but I think it's still referred to as standard work for us as members, that we are encouraged to request and make use of information that will enable us to test the adequacy and necessity of reserves, monitor changing reserves over time relative to spending, and understand how reserves compare with those held by councillors facing similar circumstances. So I think that, you know, that's exactly the sort of questions that Nigel has been posing this afternoon. And I think we can look forward to having that more detailed discussion in the autumn, as suggested by the Director of Finance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Llewellyn. Councillor Purcell, I'm so sorry. I should have called you in before, Councillor Llewellyn. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wasn't intending on speaking this afternoon, and I'm sorry I couldn't attend the pre-briefing yesterday. And I take on board your comment a little earlier that you didn't wish to have any discussion about council tax. And I would totally accept that, except that this morning over my breakfast cereal, I read a very interesting article by the Cabinet Member for Finance talking about the reserves. So with your indulgence, I would like to make a comment and ask a question of the Cabinet Member but I wait to hear whether you're going to permit that comment and question to be asked.
Right. So, Councillor Purcell, your question is relating to council tax
And
specifically?
reserve. It's reserves and council tax.
They are linked, is it?
Yes.
Right. Okay. I'm going to have to take advice from Craig here.
Okay.
Craig, would you be able to advise on what is allowed within the report?
Sorry about that, a bit of a delay in the technical issues and I'm afraid comes up. So I think that if the question goes to the comment about the reserves and the figures ultimately that we are holding within what's identified specifically in the report, then ultimately it would be achievable. If it's about council tax rates in general, shall we say, and the different elements for it, then I would say it is outside the concept of this report and it could be picked up afterwards. But if it relates specifically to reserves and what's in your report today, then I think then that would ultimately be achievable. If you want to ask your question, and if I feel it's strayed, maybe I'll come in then and potentially stop it at that point. But I think it'd be wise, probably with respect to the chair, if you start the question and we'll see if there are any issues with it in that regard, not knowing specifically what it is you want to say.
Okay, absolutely. Lynette, over to you.
Thank you. I think this shows the value of pre-briefing, doesn't it? However, right. Okay. What I wanted to say, and do stop me at any point, I noted with interest the Evening Post article today about today's meeting in which the Cabinet member celebrates the healthy state of the Council's reserves. And she mentions that the specific reserves have increased by 12 million. She says in the same article, this will allow the Council to support recovery on a positive footing in every part of the county borough. And then says she will be asking for views on how best we can support people and businesses. So what I wanted to refer to was the following. She will no doubt recall the proposal that Plaid Cymru made that we should freeze the council tax in order that we could support every council taxpayer in Neath, Talbot, and thus support every business in the local community. I actually said that this would be an extraordinary gesture in these extraordinary times, the same word that's just been used by our director. We were told this could not be done. However, we're now being told that the reserves have increased by £12 million. So this either is a good news story or a bad news story. So I wanted to address the question to the Cabinet member. Was the Cabinet member not aware of the very healthy state of reserves when she dismissed the suggestion by the opposition? Or was she just not listening to the people who had taken time to try and address this so-called listening council with their concerns? I'd like a reply from the Cabinet member, please.
Okay, before I call the Cabinet members, Craig, can you clarify if this question is...
Indeed, I'm sorry if the question has been put. I think the way we've got to look at this, Councillor Purcell, is the first part of the question, obviously you're commenting on the use of reserves ultimately going forward and the additional 12 million. That I think is a legitimate question probably to take. I think we have to excuse the reference to the council tax element as not being relevant to this overarching report. But if the question is reworded as to what the focus may be, for example, on the additional 12 million reserves, are there any plans associated with it, and what that discussion is going to be, that will turn the question into a valid question then at that point, excluding any elements of the council tax side of things. Thank you, Chair.
I'm happy to say whatever Craig just said I should say.
Would you like to rephrase that again?
What he said.
Yes.
Would he repeat it?
Okay. I think then the question ultimately is, obviously you've identified as part of the report that there's an additional sum that is now being placed in reserves. Have those reserves been earmarked or being considered for any potential issues going forward at this stage?
Brilliant.
Right,
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Okay, can I call up Cabinet Member for Finance, please, Carol Clement?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd start by saying that I always take advice as well from our highly qualified team, the director and the head of finances, isn't it, Hugh? No, what I would say to you would be is I asked Howell a question a very, very long time ago about, where we set our reserves and then we make a decision. However, after making a decision, a lot of money is coming through from Welsh Government that are specific reserves that we're adding in for schools, and there's a whole list of things in the article you refer to. What we also have to consider moving forward is that we have a £50 million gap over the next 3 years. So We now will be moving forward into the next year, bearing in mind with COVID, our officers have been absolutely up to their eyes in it. They've given out millions of pounds worth of grants to businesses. They're a very small team. They have worked really, really hard. And I actually was going to speak at the end, Chair, but I'd like to take the opportunity while I've been called to say how absolutely outstanding everyone in finance has been during this extraordinary period, with all the work that they've put in, and especially seeing as at times they've been almost annihilated with, unfortunately, sickness and things like that. So what I would say is, coming out of COVID and into recovery, this is now where we need to look at where this extra money that we've been given will be going to. As I've stated in the article that you referred to this morning, there's millions and millions of pounds there that's specifically for certain things. So it's not 12 million general reserves. The general reserves have just gone up. So yeah, I mean, we're moving forward now. We'll be working with the director, the head of finance, and senior officers as to what we will be prioritising moving forward. I hope that answers the question.
Councillor Purcell, do you wish to come in?
No, that's fine, thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much. Quickly then, Nigel Hunt, Councillor Nigel Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the question I wanted to ask Hywel earlier was, is there a regular pattern of the Welsh Government giving us money at the end of the financial year? And, has our reserves been around about the 20 million mark for how long has it been around the 20 million mark? Has it been 3 or 4 years or 1 or 2 years? So there's sort of the last questions I'd like to ask today on this. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Mr. Jenkins?
Yeah, I remember the question as well now, so apologies I didn't remember it earlier. In terms of late announcements, yes, the Welsh Government makes some announcements normally in January, February of the financial years, but they're usually linked with social care and some areas in environment where they wish to allow projects to be funded and delivered by the end of the financial year. But we've never, ever seen the amount of monies that have been confirmed in the current year. For example, this Oughton report is informing you that we've had reimbursement of loss of income claims in the year, and in terms of that bit of the report, there was £511,000 that we were waiting for loss of income in relation to Hillside, and only got to know about that at the beginning of April. So the position has been changing quite dramatically in the years, and that figure is included in the table that is under section 2.4 of the report, where we had reimbursement of additional expenditure of £14.5 million for the extra costs we'd incurred, and then £9.6 million of the loss of income, and within there is that Hillside ones. And they also approved some claims that we had made for loss of income in the first quarter, April to June last year, around such things as licensing, registrars and others. Not a huge amount of value, but it was right at the end of the year that the Welsh Government approved them. The table then goes on to talk about the other Welsh Government funding that they announced of 4.4 million through digital transformation, saving strategies, support for council tax, the circular economy. I know the circular economy is only 153,000 and the council tax administration is 153, but all again during March of the year. And then the extraordinary amount of work that staff, both in my business rates team and, to be fair, in the economic development team, are paid out of grants to businesses. £47.6 million has been paid out there over various iterations during the financial year, and that is still ongoing into the current year. Support for the carers, the payments to the carers, for those who are carers on the sick pay scheme, those people who have been advised by TTP to self-isolate. Lots of work going in there, along with a small amount of money in cash terms, but significant in terms of impacts for the residents affected in Skewen. So in terms of that arrangement, that's where we're at. In terms of general reserves, yes, they have been in the region of 19 million pounds over the last couple of years. But part of that is because of the excellent recovery rate we have been doing on council tax. Council tax is we have a council tax support scheme in place for those most vulnerable and who needed support, and significant additional support was provided during last financial year and at the beginning of this financial year as well. But we have collected 97.9% of the council tax last year, in terms of the reprofiled amount of monies that was coming in as well. And the amount of work that has been going on and the commitment from the staff to help people and to collect the money has been very much welcomed during the last year, to ensure that we are in a better position to go into future years to enable important work that the council needs to recommence as we are moving out of the various COVID pandemic lockdown periods. And this allows us to do so now in a better way than we ever had before we closed the books recently, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Councillor Suzanne Pattison, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. As much as I'd like to just look at one line in the budget and compare it to 22 other authorities, I think there's a lot more to it, and Howell has just explained more or less what I was going to say, that you cannot take the one line without looking at council's priorities, geography, whether or not they've got a city deal type thing going, their relationship with unions, what they're trying to provide. I think it's quite simplistic to just take one line out of the whole hundreds of lines there must be in the budget and say, we want to be like that council or that council. I'm a Neath Talbot councillor, and when I look at budget lines, I again take advice from senior officers who are very professional, and I'm very comfortable with what we've been advised to do and what we will be advised to do from officers. So I'd just like to make that point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pattison. I see no other indication.
I got what my hand was up.
Is it? Sorry, Councillor Hunt, please, Steve Hunt.
Yeah, I think somebody took it down. Yeah, no, just a general question. How well you mentioned monies that obviously to do a budget, you've got to know what you already have in the bank to balance the budget and deal with that at that time. So I'd be sorry to see you go. You're a first-class head of finance and done a superb job for Neath Talbot Council. I just wondered when you mentioned certainly this unforgettable year, the COVID situation, and money's feeding into the authority. Is there a process within the authority, and even when you leave, perhaps, that when you know monies are committed, whether they're in the bank account or not, they come in, would they form part of the budget discussion? Because I think there's a lot of valid points about council tax made, and I think every councillor in the whole authority wants to see council tax reduced. That goes without saying. It's how we get to that position. So I just wondered if we knew, even if it wasn't there, like by the time we get to our budget setting, that there's X amount going to be coming. Could that form part of the discussion for council tax at that time? That's all I wanted to know. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I'll take you back 12 months to this time last year, and you'll recall that we were extremely concerned that the UK and Welsh governments hadn't announced any additional funding or anything in relation to managing COVID at that time. And it took a little bit of time for both the governments to actually put their money forward in terms of the funding to come up with. They'd already announced some elements of the furlough scheme, but that changed several times over the year. The amount of money they were making available for the health service and other activity for TTP, all of it took time. But on page 47 of the report, it talks about £24 million worth of additional costs or income that we have been reimbursed. And this time last year, we said, I think when my early reports were saying, we could be facing a £20 million shortfall in the way the council was going to have to deal with in 2021 if no additional funding was going to be made available. And that is summarised in effect by what we are here now. I think we're in a slightly different position now that we are in 15 months on from the initial impact of COVID coming into the country back in March 2020. And that is that the Welsh Government and the UK Government have made some announcements of budget funding for the current year. They have announced that there was £206 million for managing the local authority hardship fund for the first 6 months. I understand today that they have allocated another £32 million to the TTP service, to the Test, Trace and Protect service, to be able to extend that through to the end of March next year, March 2022. And that's good news because it allows us now to have some continuity of service on some of those elements. We know some of the announcements they are making, and they are taken into account when they make them. But of course, there's some delay sometimes, as I said earlier, in the loss of income claims for the quarter. They dealt with the second half year, more or less, from January to March is when they told us that they were extending the scheme, but we didn't know how much cash we were going to get. And that caused us problems. So you will have seen in the budget monitoring report, when I bring it to members, an adjustment saying, I am expecting this much money from the Welsh Government to be reimbursed to us during the year. But when I reported to you on the 8th of March, that figure was nowhere near the level of increasing our general reserves by £12 million that are reflected here. I was expecting the reserves to go up by about 1.2 million at that time. So an additional £10 million plus came in the last few weeks of the year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jenkin. Councillor Hunt, I've given you 3 opportunities. You want to come back in, is it? Is it on this point or?
Yes, Chair, briefly, I just want to reply
to... Can you make it brief, please? Because,
okay.
You know,
I just want to come back briefly to Councillor Patterson, really. I think that Howell and Hugh and all the financial team do a great job for us, but I think as a member, we're all duty bound to scrutinise them and to get value for money. And when you say about data and comparing data, I think it is beneficial actually to find out what reserves Swansea or Carmarthen or Powys or Rhondda Cynon Taf or Bridgend, what they have, and compare that with ours. I think that's really beneficial. And as members, we should be doing this. We need to get the balance right in what level of reserves we need. Now, we've been hovering, from what I can hear today, from between 18 and 20 million for the time that I've been elected member. So why couldn't we go up to 16 or 14 million? I mean, I know we have risks, of course, and we have to consider this. But are we sitting on the right level of reserves? And that's the question.
Point of order, we're straying into where we should be setting our reserves now.
Okay, I think the debate is going off the track now. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to stop there.
Well, we need to scrutinise. We do need to scrutinise.
Yes,
That's
and I given you and I given you 3 and the 4th attempt. So
Thank you,
I
Chair.
think that's fair enough. Okay. I don't see any other indication. So the recommendation is on page 53. I will need a proposer and a seconder, please.
I move, Chair.
Okay, seconder, please.
I second.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on then. We have 2 urgent items. And as previously mentioned, we have decided to scrutinize the private use custody service urgent report. But for us to do that, we will need to move to private. So access to meetings, to resolve to exclude the public for the following items pursuant to Regulation 4, bracket 3 and bracket 5 of the statutory instrument 2001, number 2290, and the relevant exempt paragraph of Part 4 of Schedule 12A to Local Government Act 1972. Can I please have a proposal and a seconder to move into
Chair.
private, please?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to thank